What was supposed to be a thrilling outdoor adventure quickly spiraled into one of New Zealand's most devastating tragedies. Imagine signing up for an exciting canyoning expedition, expecting a few splashes, some adrenaline, and stories to tell for years, only to have it all end in horror, confusion, and irreversible loss. This wasn't just a story of bad luck or unpredictable nature. It was a chain of decisions, missed warnings, ignored protocols, and preventable errors that ultimately cost 7 young lives. These weren't extreme athletes taking on a dangerous feat. They were 16-year-old students trusting their instructors, trusting the system. The system, however, failed them in nearly every possible way. Back in 2008, a group of 11 people set out on what should have been a moderately challenging canyoning session at the Mangatepopo Gorge in New Zealand. The group was made up of 9 teenagers, all just 16 years old, and 2 instructors from a well-respected outdoor education center. The plan was to traverse roughly 200 meters of stream in the canyon and then return the same way. The trip sounded adventurous but manageable, at least on paper. Mangatepopo Gorge isn't just any casual stroll through the wilderness. It has steep, rocky walls, narrow passages, slippery slopes, and water crossings. On a good day, it requires a decent level of fitness and comfort in cold, chest-deep water. But the day this group went in wasn't a good day. Rain was already forecasted early in the morning. Around 8:08 a.m., a staff member reviewed the forecast and saw there was a chance of rain, but that wasn't treated as a reason to cancel or delay the expedition. That was mistake number 1. The very same weather map actually displayed an alert for heavy rainfall in the area the group would be entering. That critical information was ignored. It's haunting to know this wasn't even the first time the center had faced such a situation. Back in 1976, a young girl on a similar trip was swept away and drowned in the same gorge. Despite that tragedy, procedures weren't properly reinforced. There was no strict requirement for staff to check the weather maps every time before leading students into the canyon. At this center, the culture was simply to go ahead, rain or shine. So, without a second thought, the group headed into the gorge, unaware of how quickly things would spiral. And even more unsettling is how little had changed over the decades. After the 1976 tragedy, there were promises of improved safety, better training, and stricter guidelines, but most of those never materialized. Staff turnover and complacency eroded whatever safety culture had briefly taken root. New instructors weren't properly briefed on the old incident, and over time, its memory faded into just another cautionary tale rather than a wake-up call. The canyon itself remained unforgiving, yet those leading these trips didn't always treat it with the respect it demanded. Training manuals weren't updated, and survival scenarios weren't regularly rehearsed. Parents sent their children to this center with the belief that it was safe, never imagining history could repeat so brutally. Even simple technology like live GPS trackers or weather alerts on mobile devices could have made a difference. But in 2008, those tools weren't prioritized. The systems in place didn't fail just once. They failed over 30 years, and 7 innocent lives paid the price. Early into the journey, the teachers started noticing signs of distress. Some students were already struggling with the swimming sections. One of them panicked and started crying, pleading to turn back. That's the moment that should have raised red flags. Yet the group continued. Another critical detail came to light later. One of the kids had a physical impairment, something that wasn't even recorded on his medical form. Nobody knew. That's mistake number 2. Even more shocking, the registration forms didn't ask about swimming ability, even though canyoning involves a lot of swimming and wading through strong currents. It was something the center's policy technically required, but somehow it wasn't enforced. As the group pushed further, the rain intensified. The stream, now muddy and swift, became more dangerous. Around the halfway point, the turnaround spot, a student was nearly swept away by the current. That alone should have triggered an immediate retreat. But the group didn't know there was a safer option. Here's where mistake number 3 unfolds. The gorge had designated emergency escape routes clearly marked on maps. However, those maps were never provided to the teachers. Not only were they unaware of these exits, they didn't even know they existed, and so they passed right by an emergency escape point twice. If they had taken it, the outcome might have been very different. What makes this even more alarming is that the emergency escape routes weren't a hidden feature. They were standard parts of the canyon's safety infrastructure, meant specifically for situations like this. Yet, due to a breakdown in internal communication, no one thought it necessary to brief the teachers on their locations. The maps showing these critical exits were kept at the center, gathering dust instead of saving lives. It wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a missed obligation. These routes were designed to offer a lifeline when conditions deteriorated, and on that day, they could have been the difference between life and death. But when those leading the group don't even know a lifeline exists, panic and poor decisions are inevitable. The irony is bitter. The group was never truly trapped by nature, but by their lack of information. Had they turned just a few meters in the right direction, the story could have had a completely different ending. The group decided to push onward, unaware that they were heading deeper into a trap. The instructors hadn't been trained properly to handle emergencies in this specific terrain. Though they had passed a basic competency test, their knowledge wasn't deep enough to guide a group safely through a rapidly flooding gorge. That's mistake number 4. They should have been thoroughly familiar with the location, its hazards, and all emergency exit routes. But they weren't. The result? More lost time, more exposure to danger. Eventually, fatigue started to weigh on everyone. About 135 meters downstream, the group decided to stop and rest on a rocky ledge, thinking it was safe enough to wait for the waters to recede. But the water didn't recede. It kept rising, slowly at first, then more aggressively. What was ankle-deep became knee-deep. The ledge was narrow and slick. The kids had to cling to the rock face to keep from being swept away. This was exactly the kind of situation where a solid crisis management plan should kick in. But it didn't. The outdoor center's policy did list flooding as a risk, but it offered no practical strategies for staff to follow in real time. And the staff back at the center, despite seeing rising water levels on their monitoring systems, didn't act decisively. That's mistake number 5, failing to implement the crisis management plan when it mattered most. Back in the gorge, the instructors were out of options and time. Communication was another disaster. One of the teachers attempted to radio for help, but the radio had been packed away, turned off, disassembled, and double-bagged for waterproofing. By the time it was reassembled, it was too late. And even when they got it working, the canyon's walls blocked the signal. This wasn't the first time the center used this gorge. A radio repeater could have been installed to ensure better communication, especially in emergencies. But none was in place. That's mistake number 6. As panic set in, the instructor on the ledge had to make a split-second decision. She decided to attempt an escape plan. The idea was to jump into the river, swim downstream to a safer area, and throw back a safety line every 5 minutes for the students to catch. A few of the students were tethered to stronger swimmers using makeshift harnesses made from webbing and carabiners. The water was deafening, making it almost impossible to shout instructions, so the teacher used hand signals and tried to lip read to communicate with the others. She leapt into the torrent, managing to reach a shallow area just above a dam. From there, she threw back the rope, urging students to swim one by one towards safety. The first student who followed her got swept over the dam, hitting a log and some rocks before scrambling to shore. Bruised and bleeding, he was told to use the radio and call the center. But even then, confusion reigned. There were no clear instructions on which channels to use for emergencies. Radio communication procedures hadn't been drilled or practiced. Rescue teams didn't have a smooth plan. That's mistake number 7. Meanwhile, another student tried to swim and was pulled by the raging water to the opposite bank. Helpless and out of reach, he too was swept downstream. His body would be found much later, over 2 kilometers away. Only one radio was with the group, so the 2 instructors couldn't even coordinate with each other. The roaring water made shouting pointless, and without a second radio, critical instructions couldn't be shared. Despite their bravery, the students were now fighting a losing battle. The water was merciless. One by one, they tried to swim. One by one, they vanished under the churning brown waves. The rope couldn't reach far enough, and those too weak or too panicked to grab hold were dragged away. Within minutes, just 5 minutes, 6 students and one of the instructors were gone. A dream expedition had become a nightmare. Later, the bodies of 2 students were found over 2 kilometers downstream. A full external safety audit was conducted following the tragedy, bringing to light every failure, every oversight. Shockingly, despite the deaths and the long list of mistakes, the center passed its safety audit. It remains operational even today. It's hard to digest how many small decisions stacked up into something so catastrophic. No one action doomed the group, but together, the combination of ignored weather warnings, lack of emergency training, missing safety documents, poor communication, and weak leadership created a situation where survival became nearly impossible. After the conclusion of this tragedy, many have questioned how this could have happened again, decades after the 1976 incident. The same canyon, the same danger, the same system failures. History, unfortunately, repeated itself, with even more devastating results. It wasn't just the floodwaters that drowned those kids. It was a failure of foresight, responsibility, and preparation. Let this be more than a story about loss. Let it be a reason for reform, for accountability, and above all, for remembering the lives that should never have been lost. If stories like this matter to you, stories that demand answers, that reveal the truth behind headlines, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if this story moved you, share it. These aren't just statistics. They were kids with dreams. Their story deserves to be heard.